I am tired. The Gardnerian tradition is a small group of people. Worldwide, we're a few thousand, really. And of that small group of people, less than half are chronically online and in the habit of making trouble for other people because they have nothing better to do with their time. And this, in and of itself, is not a huge problem, because within the Gardnerian community, you have people who are online and being very vocal and mendacious, and everyone just kind of goes about their business, right? You have your coven, you practice magic, you worship the gods. None of that is in any way touched by stupid things that people are saying on the internet. But as an outsider to the tradition, it can be very difficult to understand what's going on, especially if you're a seeker, if you're trying to find a group, if you're trying to explore the tradition, and all of the most vocal voices you encounter on the internet are loud and angry and making a big deal about certain things in such a way that it makes it seem as if what they're saying is representative of the heart of the Gardnerian tradition and the Gardnerian community. And so, if you're outside of the tradition and you're not keyed in on all of the internal politics of who does what and why, and which people are informed and which people are compassionate, which people are bullies, and which people are just kind of stupid, it can be very hard to know who to listen to on the internet when you're trying to get information. So today I just want to take a few minutes and key us all in on some of the ridiculous online small group politics that is happening in the tradition right now. Because there are things that I think you'll see as a seeker on the internet that present themselves one way and really and truly mean something else entirely, and it's helpful to have access to that information so that you can be as informed as possible. In a way, this video is sort of a companion to my reading comprehension for pagans video, which, if I can figure out how, I'll link up here somehow. So the thing in particular that I am talking about is transphobia in the Gardnerian community. Transphobia has been a problem in certain Wiccan spaces for a very long time. There is a branch of Wicca, not specific to one tradition, but there's an attitude toward Wicca that sees Wicca as a fertility religion based on the heterosexual coupling of a goddess and a god, and the exploration of fertility mysteries that are fundamentally cis and heterosexual in nature. And so there have always been swaths of the Wiccan community, not just the Gardnerian community, but sort of Wicca as a whole. There have always been swaths of that community that are pretty virulently homophobic, transphobic, and so on. But conversations in religious communities tend to mirror conversations that are happening in society as a whole, and particularly in the US right now, in a moment where anti-trans discrimination is incredibly virulent, and violent for that matter, and is being enshrined in law all across the country. It's no surprise that transphobia is becoming more and more visible, more and more questioned, and more a subject of contention in the Gardnerian microcosm of the larger community. And first off, let's just get this on the table right away. The Gardnerian tradition is for everyone. I deeply and fundamentally believe that. The Gardnerian tradition is, depending on who you ask, the priesthood of particular deities and or the exploration of particular mysteries, all of which are accessible to everyone, regardless of gender, regardless of sex, regardless of sexual orientation, or other forms of identity like age or race, right? Anything that you didn't choose, anything that is a part of your identity that, theoretically at least, should be protected by any kind of anti-discrimination principle, you have a place in the Gardnerian tradition, full stop. There are people in the Gardnerian tradition, and I would like to believe they're not the majority, but because the tradition is so decentralized, so spread out, because so many of us are not online, it's very hard to gauge what the actual majority opinion is on any matter in the community. So I hope they're not the majority. Certainly they're not the majority of the community that I interact with. But there are people in the Gardnerian tradition who are strongly and hatefully transphobic and who wish to exclude trans people from the Gardnerian tradition. And an uncomfortable thing to wrestle with, but something that is true, is that those people still count as Gardnerians. They're shitty people, they're transphobic bigots, and I want nothing to do with them, but they are as Gardnerian as I am. Anyone who has been through our rites of initiation, properly done, gets to call themselves a Gardnerian. And importantly, there's no central authority in the Gardnerian tradition, so those people get to run their covens how they see fit. If they want to exclude trans people from their covens, there is no one who has the authority to prevent them from doing so. The current politics that's going on in the community is that they, or some of them at least, are trying to push that one step further and prevent other people from allowing trans initiates in their own covens, which is all kinds of wrong for all kinds of reasons. Bigotry being the first among them, but then secondly, a core principle of the Gardnerian tradition is that it's decentralized, is that each high priestess has absolute authority within her own coven. No one gets to tell any high priestess how to run her coven. But the language that these people have been using, the sort of dog whistle they've been employing, is there's been a real push from a certain sector of malicious and chronically online transphobic Gardnerians to make a distinction between so-called traditional Gardnerians and reform Gardnerians. The idea being that if you are truly traditional, you don't allow trans people in the craft. And if you allow trans people in the craft, then you are a reformist and you are trying to change the tradition. And the intention here, the purpose, is to try to get other Gardnerians labeled something different so that they can initiate basically the equivalent of the schism between the Orthodox and Catholic churches. They want to create a schism so that they can call themselves the true Gardnerians and rebrand anyone who includes trans people as belonging to a different tradition altogether. There's this weird and complicated fight over legitimacy and over claiming the place of the true Gardnerian that's happening with this kind of language. And first off, the language is just incorrect, right? So I myself firmly believe that trans people have a place in the craft. I am as conservative and traditional as it gets when it comes to Gardnerian Wicca. I am the hardest of guards with my attitude toward initiation, toward ritual. You'd be really hard-pressed to find someone who is more stodgy about Gardnerian Wicca than I am. I have very, very conservative approaches to the tradition. And, that doesn't make me better or more traditional than other people. Different covens practice things different ways, and there's a place for experimentation in the Gardnerian tradition just as much as there is a place for sort of the stodgy conservatism. It just so happens that my taste in ritual leans much more toward the sort of bare bones fundamentals, basics of the tradition. But, being traditional about the Gardnerian practice, what a terrible turn of phrase, being traditional about Gardnerian practice has nothing to do with whether or not you want to exclude trans people. But as a seeker, as an outsider, you don't necessarily know that. And as someone who is interested in the Gardnerian tradition, at least potentially, and looking to find a coven or find someone to study with, if you see this distinction being made online between traditional Gardnerians and reform Gardnerians, and if you don't know what the subtext is there, what that's actually referring to, it's very easy to think, oh, well, I'm interested in the Gardnerian tradition, I'm interested in the traditional tradition and not some alteration of it, so I'm going to look for one of these groups that's labeling themselves traditional in opposition to so-called reform. And, I think that's a shame because I think you're going to end up with shitty people. But more than that, I think you should be informed as to what that really means. If you want to end up with a group that excludes trans people, that is your right. Once again, they are no less Gardnerian than I am. I think they're bad people, but they're no less Gardnerian. But you should be aware that that's what you're choosing if you're looking at a group that's saying, we are traditional Gardnerians and not reformists. And if you encounter such a group and they're using that kind of language, ask them what they mean by being traditional and not reformist. Ask them what they mean by reformists. Because chances are very good that they will be a little evasive with you. Maybe they'll give you some kind of a story about how the craft is about biology or something else. But what it really boils down to is that they don't want trans people in the craft. That's really the only distinction that can actually be made there. Because everything else that they do, that they claim is traditional, the people they're calling reformists also do. Most of the people who have been labeled reformists by this weird online, 4chan, gotta get a job current of Gardnerian QAnon, most of those people are among the most traditional and conservatively minded ritualists I know in the tradition. So the label of reformist is applied in bad faith. It's applied in a political attempt to make other people out not to be real Gardnerians. And specifically what it's being used to denote is the inclusion of trans people in the tradition. If you see that language, traditionalist versus reformist, that's what's going on underneath the hood. And I just want people to be informed about that. Because, once again, if you want to end up with a group that's going to exclude trans people, that is your choice. And I wish you the best with that. But if you, meanwhile, are coming into the tradition and genuinely don't know that that's the politics that's going on, you could end up in a really bad situation with bad people because you didn't know any better. So this is just throwing some of that politics out there where it's more visible and where you can do something with that information. I am going to wrap this up here. My phone doesn't let me plug in headphones. The headphone jack is busted. So hopefully you were able to hear me through all of this. I'll play it back before I upload it. But thanks for sticking with me. And good luck to all of the seekers out there. The Gardnerian tradition is, if I may speak from the heart, a beautiful and profound experience. Being initiated into Gardnerian Wicca was like coming home. I have never for a second had a moment of regret for joining this tradition. And the tradition itself is beautiful, but as with any community, there are some bad people in it, and there are some bigots. So, I'm gonna leave you off there. Blessed be, and goodbye.